Hello, my name is Dave Pauli, and I want to welcome you to Undercover, the show that looks between the pages of books by Missoula area authors. This show is jointly produced by the Missoula Public Library, and I'm director of the library, and Fact and Fiction Bookstore. Our guest today is Patricia Goedicke. Welcome to our show.
How do you do?
You know that you're our first published poet that we've had on our show.
Oh,
so
that's nice.
I feel especially privileged to have you today, and I wonder if we could get a close-up of the cover of your latest book. Paul Bunyan's Bearskin is the name of it. And we could just zoom in on that. Kind of want to talk a minute about the cover itself, which is a very interesting design. I wonder if you could explain that a little bit, Patricia.
Well, to me, it's a wonderful cover, and it's not my doing. It's Milkweed Edition's doing. They're my publishers. The nice thing about it is that the book as a whole is about the whole country. The central image of the book is of the United States being like a laid across the face of the continent, face down like a bearskin, right. A bearskin rug. And Paul Bunyan, of course, is the giant hero of American folk tales, European folk tales. He with his giant big blue ox. And it would have been easy for the publishers to go for that image. But the spirit of the book, I hope, is the spirit of the land that we live on that belongs to those who were first here. And that image, thank God, is a Haida image from the Haida tribes. It's of the bear spirit. And to me, it picks up one of the important themes in the whole book. Mm-hmm. And I love it anyway, just as itself.
Yeah, it is. It's very nice. Now, I wanted to ask you a little bit about getting published as a poet. You have had quite a number of books published, and you've been at this a while, but how does a poet go about getting published, or how did you get started in this whole thing?
I just wrote. I wrote and wrote and wrote when I was in college, and I'd started in grade school, as a matter of fact, but I kept on writing and sending out to the magazines, and eventually Harcourt Brace took my first book and published it, and I was off. Before that, my very first poem really had been published by Kenyon Review when John Crow Ransom was the editor, which was a thrill to me. Mm-hmm. But it's just a matter of writing and sending out to magazines that you admire, to poets that you admire, hoping that they will, in turn, respect your work and be moved by it.
Well, who are some poets that you admire, maybe both living and dead, if you can tell us?
That's a dangerous question. I start, and then I never stop. I go on naming and naming and naming. Oh, Hopkins, very much. Shakespeare, of course. Whitman and Emily Dickinson and Galway Kinnell and Louise Gluck. Coming into the public. I knew Robert Frost quite off and on fairly well when I was a young woman in college, in Middlebury College. And I went to Breadloaf when he was there, and he was a powerful influence, as was W.H. Auden, too. But I read, and I guess my influences are extremely eclectic, so it's an endless question, I'm afraid.
And what is it that brought you to Missoula, I wonder? How did you end up here?
Well, my husband and I had been living in Mexico. We lived there for about 12 years. He was teaching at Columbia Graduate School of Journalism, and I was teaching at Sarah Lawrence. No, I was teaching at Hunter then, in New York, and we were both trying to write. And we couldn't. It was just we lived in too small an apartment, and we were too busy. So we had a little money, and we just decided to go to Mexico and stay as long as we could and write as much as we could. And 12 years later, we were still there, and I had written 4 books of poetry, and he had written a novel and a book of poetry. And around that time, the money began to run out, and I got a job teaching at Sarah Lawrence in New York. And while I was there, it was just a 1-year guest faculty appointment on the creative writing program. They called from Montana when Dick Hugo was still here and asked me to be visiting poet in residence. So I knew the West. My first husband was from Wyoming. And so I was delighted to come out. We came out. They asked us out again another year. And Dick died, unfortunately, and terribly, sadly, and but that, and then I was hired in 1983 and have been here ever since.
Well, we're glad you are here. I wonder if we could talk a little bit about some of the poems in this book, and then maybe any of the other things that you want to talk about as far as your writing. But I noticed there are quite a few images of, well, there are different kinds of images, but there are images of death and decays, and then there's some very lyrical things. One that I picked up was a poem about a girl on a bicycle, and I'm going to quote a little bit here: delicate eggshell pink cheeks. So there's both what I would consider to be really lyrical images of beauty, and some very I would guess for some people rather depressing images of death. There was a poem about an old man in a bed dying, and the sun's gathered around him. Where do when you look for an image to help you in a poem, where do you look, or how do you get those, I wonder? Do you know that answer?
Well, I think where everyone gets the images that go through your mind, the fleeting thoughts, the things that you are moved by, the things that you just go by and you think, oh, that's important, and you try and catch it. Then I catch it and I try to respond to it with all the five senses. That's what makes up imagery, the little pictures that we make out of taste, touch, sight, sound, and smell, which are the only things that we all have in common, the senses out of which we make sense of the world. And so I remember that was the first thing you were quoting, comes from the central part of the book where most of the poems are about women. And this was about a friend of mine. I just remembered a moment when as a very little kid, I thought that she was beautiful on her bicycle, and I wanted to tell her. And I did. And the amazing thing was she didn't laugh or anything. She said, thank you. And that always struck me as an important encounter in my life, a moment that I wanted to come back to. So I did at one point. And the other, and the images then that come in the poem, delicate eggshell pink, come as I try to respond to the beauty that I saw in her, that I remembered. And the other poem is about the death of my brother-in-law, which was a very painful and agonizing thing. His 3 sons were there trying as hard as they could to help him, and it was a dramatic and terrifying thing to watch, and I was trying to express that because it seemed important to me in life. It's what I look for in poetry, what is important to other people that likely will be important to me.
Well, what about, I wonder if we could talk a little bit about the political or social commentary that comes through in some of the poems, at least to me. I realize reading a poem is a very individual experience, and maybe what I found some others wouldn't, but you sometimes do write about war. There's a phrase in one of the poems, I can't remember which one, about fat rich countries invading poor ones, or about nuclear devastation. There's another phrase I picked up, I don't know why, but it just struck me, massive rivers of fraternity brothers murdering other people's children.
Yeah.
So, there is that political and social commentary. I wonder if you consider yourself a political activist, or where exactly does that come into?
I'm not an activist. I sometimes think I should be, but I'm a poet, so I write poetry. I don't dare call myself a poet for fear someone will say, no, you're not. That's Robert Frost's line. But anyway, I write poetry about what concerns me, and what concerns me more and more is the kind of politically disastrous policies that I see our country pursuing more and more these days. And a lot of the poems in the book are trying to deal with that kind of terminal selfishness I see that has brought us to where we are today. The one you were last quoting from is a poem that I wrote during the middle of the Gulf War.
I wondered about that.
How about if I read a couple of poems from the book that are political?
Yeah, I think that would be great.
Okay. Let me begin with that one, and then I'll go back to the one of the opening poems,
Okay.
if you want.
Sure.
The one you were quoting is called Whenever She Speaks Up. And you have to realize that I'm inventing a little bit in the middle of it. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah. It was written during the middle of the Gulf War, and in order to talk about it, I got in such a rage that I invented a new character in the history of Gulliver's Travels.
Right.
In this case, one of those giant lady Brobdingnagians who used to love to hold tiny Gulliver as close as possible to their heaving bosoms. In this case, her name is Frida, and when the poem begins, she's in the same position Gulliver was in Lilliput, only this time she's in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
So, whenever she speaks up, Frida, one of Gulliver's little-known Brobdingnagian mistresses, wakes up to find herself tied down, trussed to the pavement like some big, beautiful dirigible in the middle of a crowded intersection just outside Washington, D.C. Gulliver, why have you forsaken her? Cars drive their black tires over her thighs. Democracy, indeed. And the nights are worse. Cockroaches, half-finished ideas climb all over her body. Meanwhile, in the halls of justice, one or two ex-fighter pilots and a few dithering, nervous basketball players are sending her kids off to war. What if she grabbed up a handful of gunboats and waded the glorious Potomac after them? Whenever she speaks up, instantly they rape her down. Some of them just want to crawl back where they came from with gun and camera, occupy her womb. How can she help but bleed over them, massive rivers of arrogant fraternity brothers murdering other people's children? Crazed legislators like mosquitoes, midget cars run amok, scourge all but the moneymakers from the rotunda. In the stale, black rubber smell of overload, sweat stands up on her neck like tumors. Her brain refuses to lie down. Short-circuited, she keeps waiting for thunderbolts, some long ago lost electrical connection. What could the author have been thinking of, turning so many of his offspring against each other? She wonders why she ever paid any attention to him in the first place, him with his little stick. Now, remembering the nursery, the video games, and the toy golf clubs, the 28 flavors of ice cream she fed him whenever he asked, Frida picks up Gulliver from the sidewalk. She pinches him with her thumb. She can't stand him. She says she would rather suffocate in her own vomit than have anything more to do with him. But he is her son. I wanted to have it all male versus female or female versus male, but we are inextricably related to each other, so the blame is not easy to establish.
Mm-hmm.
You want to hear another one?
Yes.
Well, this one is my anti-jogging poem, and I have to worry about the joggers, especially today, very soon after the bank run. But I live in the university area, and I don't jog, and I get nervous about it, and I think, I should be out there. And then I think, what is all this emphasis on physical fitness?
And that was the lead-off poem in the book?
Oh, no, not quite.
No.
Yeah. Instead of physical fitness, I
Instructive.
wonder about spiritual fitness and the rest of the world, and then I wrote this poem.
Okay.
This is the second one. It's the lead poem in the second section, which is called Heartland. And I mean, that's our heartland that I'm talking about. Anyway, this is called American Exercises. The tall, yellow-haired girl jogs smoothly past our windows, bobbing up and down in her wheat-colored sweatshirt as if she were moving through water, a millionaire's yacht that thinks it can live forever. If bombs can't be controlled, bodies can. The experts put on their pink leotards. Like old-time revivalists, they sweet-talk us every morning, insisting it's our duty to ourselves. But of course, what else is there? My dear, it's no different for us either. However sedentary we may be, it's clear we too are strung out from moment to mortal moment. Since we're attached to nothing, we have to invent something. When the last giant explosion bloats into vast flattening waves, we dream we will ride them out somehow or other. If all we have is ourselves, we must protect the investment. Flexing our valuable muscles, tenderly we embrace each other, needing each precious pound of flesh. We consult marriage counselors and other coaches. In training camps all over the country, it's incredible what exercises us. In padded helmets riding bicycles, we spill out into the traffic along suburban lanes in the name of the gross national product and against Yamaha. Statistics flicker in our heads. Feverishly we count calories, even as we stuff cattle with more than enough corn to feed whole villages for years. We throw every bit of it away for a mess of low-cal cereal. My dear, I don't understand it. That nice yellow-haired girl, you and me, surely we mean no harm if all we want is each other and a little lean meat. Flesh too solid to melt into anything but the imperishably thin personalities of the only stars we lust after. Lashing our flabby legs over the raised golden stubble of excess, we keep pumping as hard as we can to escape noticing those other naturally slim figures, emaciated brown skeletons running their own race right along beside us, our sleek bodies bobbing over the prairies like steel breasts on the move, fat, carcinogenic silos stuffed with sinister rods pulsing, critically fermenting wheat. So that for the joggers.
If bombs can't be controlled, bodies can.
That's what we think, I think, in the absence of anything to believe in besides ourselves and our own needs and wishes. It seems like from being fortress America, we're rapidly becoming desert island America. We're closing in on ourselves more and more.
In fact, I think that image of a desert island America occurs somewhere else in the book, too,
on this island, another poem.
Yeah, that's right. And,
yeah.
Well, are you pessimistic then about the collective and individual narcissism we seem to have in this country?
Deeply, desperately. But I have I see nothing but darkness ahead of us. Environmental disaster, if not that, nuclear disaster, certainly a despair and degradation of the human spirit. But the essence of the future is that you don't know what is going to happen, and it may be, it certainly looks as if it's going to be dark, but it may be good, and we don't know. And so the last section of the book has a lot of poems that try to express that faith, that belief that you've got to go on as if it were going to be all right. And the title poem has the bear, although dead, perhaps being able to take up its bed and walk again. Who knows? Yeah.
Why was that, just a point of information, why was that title poem the last poem rather than the first? Is there any particular reason for that?
I don't know. I guess I always like to structure my books so that they're going towards some point of, some reason for going on. And that seems to me a reason. It's an old poem. I wrote it almost 10 years ago, when I was making a lot of reading tours and I was going across the country. It goes from place to place in the United States.
Right, yeah.
But it seemed to me to sum up a lot of what's going on in the book, where I'm trying to talk about the conflict between the many and the one. Many individuals against one archetypal, centralized establishment. That's one of the things I try to get at.
That's some really powerful stuff, I think. It affected me that way when I read it. I wonder if I could ask you a little bit about yourself, as far as the little bio in the back of the book says that you have taught at a number of colleges, and it says you have taught poetry, various academic settings, including in Guanajuato, Mexico. And I just wonder what that means exactly when you have a classroom full of students. What exactly do you do as an instructor?
Well, it depends on where we are. I teach beginning classes and I teach advanced and graduate classes. In the beginning classes, my aim is to help people wake up to themselves. I think poetry consists of each person's individual take on the world. And my idea is to make people realize how differently we each see the world, and yet, finally, how similarly we do, because we share those same five senses. And so I'm trying to get people to tell me what they really see and think and feel. And that's terribly exciting to me, when people begin to realize that all you have to do is say how you feel by using those five senses. There's a wonderful quote Carl Shapiro has, in which he says, "Poems are what ideas feel like." And I want to know what your idea of the world is, so that I can add it to my limited idea of the world and put them together. And that's really exciting to me, to see young poets beginning to do that, to realize how they can do it. And then as you go on, I'm trying to help people learn how to make the body of the vision stand up and sing and move other people. And that involves more and more technical concerns about where lines break, and prosodic concerns, and rhyme and rhythm, and shaping the poem so that it isn't just, "Oh, wow, that's great," or "Isn't that awful," which is our reaction, but a reaction that'll move other people and it really express as best I can what I feel, or you feel, or anyone else does.
There seems like a number of directions we could take, but I think since we have a poet on our show, maybe you'd like to read a couple more of your poems. You have other books. This is your newest, but you have published a number of others. There's some, maybe one or two others you'd like to read?
Why don't I read a poem that is in The Last Best Place, that great Montana book. It seems to me a particularly Montana poem. Let's see, it's on page. And it's one of, I like it because I don't understand it all. I like poems that happen that way. In some ways I do, but it's something that it's hard to articulate. That's what poetry's about. But anyway, it's called Lost. Miles from here, in the mountains, there is no sound but snowfall. The wind rubs itself against the trees under its breath. If a crow calls, it is nothing. If a branch breaks, it is nothing. The birches look at themselves in the water. The long white poles of their bodies waver and bend a little. The yellow leaves of their hair, like pieces of far-off stars, come falling, hissing onto the lake that is smooth as pewter, that is clear and tranquil as an eye, lost up here in the mountains, as if someone had dropped it. But no, the pebbles beneath the surface have no nerves they are calm. If a fish leaps, it is nothing. Surrounded by moss and blueberries, flowers breathe among the rocks, so quietly you forget everything. Up here on the crusty grass, the bushes sparkle with ice, and no footprints anywhere. If a twig snaps, it is nothing, for nothing matters once you have lost it. Down here in the valleys among the people, the sidewalks are full of holes, faint memories of far-off lakes. Up there in the mountains, in the great evergreen forests, if a woodchuck whirs, it is nothing. If a blue jay shrieks, it is nothing. Pine needles slip from the trees. Silently, they pile up on the ground.
Thank you. And thank you very much for being our guest, Patricia Goedicke, whose newest book is called Paul Bunyan's Bearskin. Appreciate very much having you on our show today.
It's a pleasure. I enjoyed it very much.
I knew this time would go too fast, and the poems are wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for listening.
And I'd like to take just a few minutes now to tell you about some of the things that are going to be happening at the library. I want to remind everybody that we do have evening and Saturday hours year-round now. We are open Monday through Saturday, and we will be on that same schedule all summer. You can call us at 721-2665 if you have any questions about our hours. I want to say a word about our summer reading program for children. We will be having special programs for both school-age children and preschoolers this summer. The activity programs for school-age children will be on Tuesdays at 1:30. That starts in June and runs through August 4th. And preschool story times will also be going on this summer. They start June 18th and run through August 7th, and those will be on Thursdays at 1:30 and Fridays at 10:30. So there'll be opportunity for both school-age children and preschoolers, which we identify as about age 3 to 5, to participate in some programs at the library this summer. And for the reading program, we will be offering prizes to children every time they visit the library and have read a book. I also want to say a word about our adult book discussion group, which meets on the third Thursday of the month. Will be going on year-round through the summer. We meet at 7 o'clock in the library meeting room. You need to call the library again at 721-2665 if you want any information about that. And finally, just want to remind people that if you want to get some interesting poetry, you might want to try the library for that too. We just purchased a copy of Patricia Goedicke's new book, and we're very happy to have that. Thank you very much. welcome to Undercover. My name is Dave Pauli. I'm director of the Missoula Public Library, and this show is a joint production of the Missoula Public Library and Fact and Fiction Bookstore. And tonight, our very special guest is Bill Kittredge. Welcome.
Thank you.
And Bill's newest book is called A Hole in the Sky, a Memoir, which is a memoir of his childhood and youth in a place called Lake County, Oregon, which probably many of you are not familiar with. I happen to be, having grown up in Oregon. I know a little bit about it. But I grew up on the more gentle side of the mountains, so I'm going to, first of all, Bill, ask you to maybe if you could describe a little bit for the viewers about Lake County, what the geography is like and what kind of a place that is, because it's pretty remote, and most people I don't think have ever heard of it, probably.
Yeah, well, it's part of the northern edge of the Great Basin, which is, means it's landlocked. Great lava flows ran through there, millennia ago, or many millennia ago, and it's sagebrush and rimrock country essentially, and there's some landlocked valleys in there where the creeks flow into it, which are very fertile. And the valley I grew up in was one of those valleys. It's that big valley full of peat soils and lots of water essentially, and there are several of those valleys. There's one over at the foot of the Steens Mountain, one down at the foot of the Ruby Mountains in Nevada, and they're kind of like oases. And the rest of it's really high and dry, and it's high desert, high cold desert, essentially.
Yeah. I just wonder, you said at some point in the book that desert and mountain landscape is pretty much imprinted on your mind's eye.
Well, I think it is. When I came to Missoula, and I've lived here 20-some years now, and Missoula still seems kind of, vertical, kind of. The mountain, everything's up and down, and that's that huge horizontal landscape, and it really is imprinted in ways more than just that abstractly. I can still kind of turn and look back and expect to see the rim that was behind our house, and I can see it perfectly clearly in my mind's eye as I sit here and talk to you right now, and I assume I always will until I'm dead. But there are those forms that that's the real world essentially. And I knew it as a child, and I knew it when I was an adult, and I still see it in my mind.
Yeah. Well, what kind of what did that particular landscape and geography and also the human geography of that place, how do you think that contributed to you as a writer? I mean, the book really isn't about you becoming a writer. It's more about the other parts of your life as your youth. But how did that contribute, do you think?
Well, it's a hard place to live, or it really was a hard place to live when I was growing up. We lived 40 miles from asphalt. We had no telephone. There was no electricity. We had no Delco power plant, which makes it sound like we had, it was pretty tough. But we had great gardens. We had, on the other hand, things were, we had a pretty good life. But people expected to have hard knocks. People expected to work very hard. People expected to never have time off. You work 7 days a week, most of the year. And those people that I grew up with, I really learned to love and respect. And when they went to town, they raised the devil, and they were boiled in, and I liked them a lot. And on the other hand, as years went by and the old ways began to shift into the so-called new ways of agribusiness, which really, I think in that valley, happened in 1945 more dramatically than any other time. Suddenly, on the ranch, a big ranch that I lived on, we had about 200 work teams that we hayed with and various things like that. Sold all the teams in 1945, my grandfather did, and bought a whole bunch of brand new John Deere tractors. Yeah. And everything went mechanical, and a whole kind of the way we lived changed. There were fewer people, there were fewer animals. We began to farm huge fields that were, economical to farm with machinery. Everything became mechanized. There were, and that way of life changed and vanished, or it didn't vanish, but it changed a lot and is vanishing. And I regretted its going. I think agribusiness probably is not the best way to farm. For the most part, that kind of agribusiness that I was taught in ag school at Oregon State, and everybody I know who went to ag school was taught to do things that way. Wendell Berry writes about it in The Unsettling of America. What a bad idea that was, and what a bad idea it's been for America. Now we're trying to learn, many of us, to do things differently. Many ranchers and farmers are trying to learn to do things differently. We're going to have to.
In fact, you talk late in the book about how there are people there who have gone back to using horses again.
Oh yeah, horses are more economical, you know. You don't have to buy parts for horses, you know. And people are, you know, all over the West are doing that. I think there's a great kind of sense of renewal that people are going back to the old ways of doing things, which are, in fact, more economical and more efficient. And it's the same way with producing crops. It's not in any sense the most efficient or most productive way to produce crops, to farm in these with equipment on these huge fields. That old labor-intensive kind of cropping on small acreage will produce a lot more per acre. All you've got to do, and take a lot better care of the land. I traveled this winter in Europe and you know, in agricultural areas that have been farmed, I don't know, for 2,000 or 3,000 years, and they were in better shape than land we'd farmed for 25. You know.
Well, and you also, in the book, in retrospect, as you looked back at the life you'd had there, you realized that was a very fragile ecology, and that there were huge flights of waterfowl at one time, and you can remember those from your childhood, and those are pretty much gone.
Well,
but at the time, nobody was thinking about that, evidently.
Oh no, it seemed like everything was everything would last forever. We had this great richness. We had peat soil 6 or 8 feet deep. We had, you know, hundreds of thousands, literally, of water birds. People go there now and exclaim over the numbers of water birds, and all I can say is, you know, if you just say, you should have been here when there were some water birds, you know. And we thought things would last forever, and we were trying to, essentially, we thought we were bringing order to things. We thought we were making things better. I don't think anybody thought they were deliberately wrecking anything. You know, we really thought we were doing God's work, in a sense. I'm not very religious, but we thought we were bringing order to the world. We were doing a good thing. I think everybody wants to, you know, have a positive effect, and we thought we were. Unfortunately, we weren't in many cases.
Well, now, your grandfather was not a major character in here, but he seemed to loom large over things, I think. And he was almost obsessed with getting ahead, buying this land, and getting a...
Yeah, and you have to wonder, a lot of those old-timers were, you know, and people still are, obviously. He really was obsessed with it. He wanted more land, and that was like, it was a representative person. It represented personal worth to him in some kind of way, to have more property. More cows, really, but, you know, property to run the cows on. As my grandmother once lamented when she was an old woman, she said, every time we got some money, we bought more land. We never did anything else. They never went anywhere. And they ended up being people with you know, in the books they had a lot of money, but they'd never been anywhere, and they'd never done much of anything except just accumulate and accumulate. And that was the game he played, and that was the game he loved, and that's all he wanted to do. All he wanted to think about, that's all he talked about. He was, you know, obsessive in the way many of us are, and except that that obsession didn't allow much room for people, didn't allow much room for family. The kind of way things went in our family is, you know, if your comfort or your relationship with your children or your wife or something like that was made a little bit precarious by the duties the property demanded of you, why, that was just too bad. You know, that people would get by and the property had to be served. And the property kind of was in the saddle, as Thoreau said, I think, and to misappropriate Thoreau a little bit.
But your father seemed like, the way you wrote about him, some contrast there. I mean, he had a sense of fun. He had a major falling out, evidently, with your grandfather.
Yeah, and it wasn't necessarily over these policies. He was as deep into them, I think, as my grandfather was. But he had a better sense of balance. He had some fun in life. You know, a lot of fun in life, essentially, and he began to, the place where they really parted was over the idea that you should sacrifice everything to property. He thought it was nice to have big farming properties, and he enjoyed the work, and he was a terrific farmer, but he really didn't think you should sacrifice your life to it, and or that you should be inhumane to other people, you know, in order to acquire property. My grandfather pulled all kinds. And there's a long history of sharp dealing with people who were disadvantaged, who he took advantage of and acquired property from in various ways when they were in trouble.
I wonder, I have a quote here, and I wonder if maybe you could explain that a little bit if you would. You say early in the book, you say, without stories, we do not know who we are or who we might become. And you were talking there about how there weren't a lot of stories in your family. Like you couldn't get a sense of what had gone on from the family.
Well, it's really true. It's like, I think in the very early days in that country, as everywhere, there was a lot of storytelling. Just that's what you did. There was no TV. Right. They had no books. People told stories. But as they began to get economically more secure and more located, they began to not tell those stories. It was almost, so many strange and terrible, wondrous things that happened to them over the years of settlement that it was almost like they're embarrassed by those things. I don't really know why those stories fell away. I can conjecture, but I don't know. But there were wonderful stories. My grandfather on the Klamath Marsh built quite an elaborate house when he finally began to get some money and some property together. And the spring and well went dry, and he moved that house about 6 miles up the road to a little knoll beside the Williamson River. It took him about 3.5 years. The family lived in the house while it went up the road on rollers, and when there was a busy season, they would all just live in the house along the road. People would drive around them in the pummie dust, and then when there was slack time, they'd move the house some more. Well, that's, as I've said before, perfectly Faulknerian, the damnedest story I ever heard, and I never heard it from those people at all. It was like they didn't want anybody to know that, how humiliating that they'd been forced to do.
But you did recount that in the book.
Yeah. And there are lots of stories like that. But I had to go back and really search them out. We weren't told them when we were kids, and I regret that. It really, it ends up, if you don't have those stories, you end up distanced from the place where you live. You end up distanced from your family. You don't end up with that sense of, or as much a sense of intimate connection as you could have.
Well, at one point in the book, you stated that you thought of yourself as a boy who was not much good at anything. But I was really impressed, like, for example, by your horsemanship skills. You describe in here how you were very young and you went out on a cattle drive and you ride through the swamps, and you didn't know how to swim, and they told you, well, don't worry, your horse will swim. Hang on to it. I didn't think of you as somebody who didn't have many skills.
So my grandfather said to my mother, so that kid won't drown.
I was quite impressed by and also I think a really strong work ethic. The work was incredibly hard.
Yeah, well, we worked, all the time. It's true, and you never, it wasn't as if anybody ever gave you any chance to realize there was any other way to go about life, In other words, you simply worked, and once in a while on Saturday night they had a dance and everybody blew out, but basically you worked 7 days a week most of the year. When I was on the ranch, up until in the middle 60s, there were a couple of weeks in June and a couple of weeks in October in October and early November, when you really didn't have to work 7 days a week, when nobody was feeding cows, when you weren't farming, when you weren't haying, when you weren't, So those were the times you took vacation, late October, early November, or a couple of weeks in the middle of June when irrigating was kind of running down and you're waiting to get started haying. But the rest of the time, 7 days a week.
Yeah, well, my question was, why did you think of yourself in that way as a boy who didn't have many special skills?
Oh, because I think I was surrounded by people who had prodigious special skills. Went to the desert with the people that, Rossi Dollarhide, who I talk about in the book, was a world champion bulldogger and, way up there in the saddle bronc and so on and so forth. Some of these people were wonderful horsemen, My theory is that in the real West, people men were never judged by speed with a gun. They were judged by horsemanship, and I think that's really probably true in the cowboy and the ranchland West. And there are many other people. A kind of step uncle of mine, Bill Golden, I remember, was just a legendary worker. Worked himself to death, almost literally. And you go out there, and there were. These were people that I was so intimidated by. I think I never imagined. I was a good planner. I got work done. I was a good farmer. Finally, things like that. I believe. But I feel like I was surrounded by giants when I was a young man.
Here's another quote for you. I wonder if you could talk about this a little bit. You said, "There seems to be a long gap between much of what drives us and the things even the most daring of us are willing to bring up in conversation."
Well, I think that's true. I think that there are many things that you or I won't talk about to people we're not, that intimate friends, or perhaps, somebody you're married to, or probably not, children maybe eventually as they grow up. But and even at that point, there are probably things that you won't. I mean, we all have our secrets, one of the things that seems to me to be true in the American West, in a society like the one I grew up in, where there's far too many secrets, far too little talking to one another. Everybody's, there's always that stoical Westerner thing, and there's a lot of storytelling in various parts of the West, but still, I think it's a good idea to. I think we could use a lot of candor. I think we could use a lot of just saying things. People say about this book, well, you certainly confessed an enormous number of kind of things that would embarrass some people about yourself, and I said, yeah, but so what? I get to eat dinner tonight anyway. It doesn't matter. And in fact, I really believe this business about talking to one another and being candid about the things that have happened, the things we feel, and I kind of felt if you're gonna say these things in this book, you probably better do it. Mm-hmm. And it's fine. It's okay. Nothing happens.
Well, in fact, in the book you described in a couple of places visiting with your parents, and they both lived quite a long
Oh yeah, they did. My mother's still alive. Yeah.
Did you rectify any of that with them? Did you get to talk?
Yeah. I just saw my mother, as a matter of fact, about a week ago in Salem, Oregon. Went down to Eugene for the Pacific Northwest Booksellers. And she talks now with great candor, and we do. We tell stories to each other, and we laugh and hoot. And there are some people, there's a woman I mentioned in here named Tootie Gunderson in Lakeview, used to be a bartender. And a lot of people have gotten in touch with me over this book, and she was one of them. And I thought, oh boy, I wonder if Tootie's mad I mentioned her in the book. Now she called me up and started telling me stories I should have used, She said, but you forgot about, And she's wonderful. It gave me heart for several days to talk to Tootie.
Well, you did describe the society that you grew up in as, I can't remember the exact wording, but something about fervently masculine or something like that. There wasn't really a place for a woman who wanted to do more than just the traditional things women had always done. And your mother tried to break that mold at one point.
She really did, and I still talk to two women in Oregon, in the Willamette Valley. My mother got involved in politics and ran for office in the 50s, and tried to break that mold, and kind of broke her heart over it, but I still talk to women who are in politics, younger women in the Willamette Valley, who took great heart from what she did. And she didn't accomplish much of anything. She ran a couple of times and got beat. But I think some younger women saw that was possible. Yes, it was an absolutely patriarchal society. It was unthinkable that a woman would be anything except maybe a school teacher. The highest office held by a woman in Lake County when I was there was superintendent of schools. And that was a job a woman could have. Beyond that, no. Like a county commissioner, the 3 women county commissioners in Missoula. Lake County, you're kidding?
But there was at least one woman who did successfully break out of that in one sense, and that was your Aunt Vi?
Vi, yeah. Well, there are those women in the West, obviously. My Aunt Vi was a ranch woman, and she in many ways chose to be a man. She went out horseback. She wouldn't keep house. She wouldn't cook. She wouldn't do any of those things. She just said, nope, I don't do those things. And she went with us, and she was enormously empowered by doing that. Suddenly, she was accepted as she had some money, she owned some property, and she went horseback every day. So suddenly she was a rancher. She wasn't a woman anymore, in a sense. And there are women all over the West, like that. I think of Teresa Jordan's book, Cowgirls, which is just reprinted by Nebraska, I think, which is many women like that in that book.
Well, you talked about also having revisited there. I guess, do you go back frequently?
Oh, every so often. I haven't gone back lately because there's a huge uproar about the ranch now, which is It almost sold very recently, the Nature Conservancy, and didn't, and some local people are buying it. About a month ago, all the equipment on the ranch was auctioned off, all the horses were auctioned off, I think all the rest of the livestock's been sold off, and a bunch of local people are buying it and splitting it up and going to try to run it. I have no idea how that's going to work out. It broke my heart, frankly, when the Nature Conservancy didn't get it.
Yeah, I sense that you would be sympathetic to that. If they
Oh
did
yeah,
that.
yeah, absolutely. I would love to see that those marshes go back to be, waterfowl habitat and not barley fields, being doused with fertilizer anymore. I'd love to see all those things go back. And I recognize that somebody's got to raise food and so on and so forth. But that particular, I don't think, in the instance of this valley, that farming, it's probably the highest use. In some other lands it probably is, but I think this would be much better off as waterfowl habitat, or most of it. I think you make those kind of sweeping generalizations is where we all get in trouble. When we're trying to say things politically. I think things are very intricate and complex, and some of it should be at least go back to its wild state again.
Well, I guess you already mentioned this, and I wanted to bring it up too, that you told stories about yourself that a lot of us wouldn't have the courage to tell, or I think must have been at least difficult. Was it difficult and painful for you to write this?
Less so than I thought it was going to be. Once you start telling the stories, and it's a nice thing in Missoula. You get a lot of support in Missoula, and while I was writing these things, occasionally I'd read something, a second wind reading series or something like that, and nobody seemed to fall dead or anything. Everything went along fine, and I would try things out, kind of see how far you could get with this, and I found that that probably in this society there's a great hunger for people to talk frankly to one another, and less so in Missoula than in a lot of the more reticent parts of the West, like Lake County, where I grew up, or perhaps some places in eastern Montana, and in the cattle ranching, country. It's people don't reveal themselves as much as they might, and I think it's okay to reveal yourself, and I think that's the way we understand each other. We understand each other's story, and if people are estranged and distant from one another, I think it's pretty hard to have a society that takes care, because we're all, the code of the West is, as Jim Crumley once told me, he said there ought to be a state down there, that whole northern end of the Great Basin ought to be a state. And Jim said, yeah. I said, the state motto would be, take care of your own damn self. And it would have been, I think.
Well, I'll ask you a question I've asked other guests, and that is, why are we such a mecca for writers here? I mean, we seem to be overflowing with writing talent here.
In Missoula, and yeah, I think that there's a lot of historical accidents that started it. H.G. Merriam and Fiedler and Van Tilburg Clark and Dick Hugo, and there's just and there was an endless bunch of writers begin to accumulate, and people found that this was a good place to live. It's a great community to live in. It's very generous. It's very open. It's very easy to live here, and it's very easy for writers to live here, and for young writers like to come, and it's good for them to be in a town that's full of writers. I always say the only excuse for any graduate program probably is it gets writers in town with other writers.
Well, I want to thank you very much for being our guest. The name of the book, again, is A Hole in the Sky, a Memoir by Bill Kittredge. Memoir of his youth and young manhood in Lake County, Oregon. Pretty interesting account, I think. I want to take a few minutes to remind people about things going on down at the Missoula Public Library. We have regular story time for preschoolers. That's approximately age 3 to 6. And we do that 3 times a week. Once on Tuesday evening at 7, and then on Thursday afternoon at 1:30, and also on Fridays at 10:30. So we cover all the bases there, trying to make sure that people can bring their kids when they have available time to do that. Another program that will be starting up again this fall that was a successful effort last year is called The Club, and that's for middle school age kids. They do a variety of activities, including discussing books that they have read recently. And we're going to be starting that up again the 28th of October at 4:30. Those kids meet. Children's Book Week is coming up in November, and we'll be doing some special events right about then. You need to call us to get more information. We'll be putting out some publicity about that, but we take every effort to do some promotions to kids about books and to parents to make sure that kids are getting all the books they need and doing the reading that we like to see them doing. And the final thing that I want to mention here and spend a little time on is a program that we started a couple of years ago called Book Babies. And this is a program where parents come in with their infants. This is kind of experimental. Not a lot of libraries are doing this sort of a program, but infants age birth to 24 months. Parents come in with the kids, and we do a special program for them. We do some real simple games and stories for the children, and then we have a speaker for the parents talking about child development or some other aspect of something that they would be interested, parents of very young children. And that happens every Wednesday, the first Wednesday of every month at 7 o'clock. And the next one will be Wednesday, October 7th. Again, if you want more information about any of the programs that I just mentioned, please call us at 721-2665, and we'll be happy to give you more information. Another thing that's happening for adults is our regular monthly book discussion group. We meet on Thursdays at 7 o'clock, the third Thursday of every month, and we have a real good group going right now, and we would welcome more people who are interested in being part of that book discussion. Talk to me, or you can also talk to Christine or Betty at 721-2665 about the details of getting involved in our book discussion. Finally, I want to mention, as I always do, I think on every show, our library hours, because we still get calls on sometimes people surprised that we're open on Mondays. We didn't used to be, but it's been almost 2 years now that we have reopened on Mondays, so we're open 6 days a week, and Monday through Thursday we're open from 10 in the morning until 9 at night, and Friday and Saturday 10 to 6. So come on down and see us. And thanks again, Bill, for being our guest today.
Thank you.